The trade war between the United States and Canada is escalating, evolving from a federal dispute into a confrontation between individual provinces. Is this the beginning of the end for good neighborly relations? The conflict began on February 1st when the U.S. president imposed tariffs of 25% on imports from Canada and Mexico and 10% on Canadian energy products. In response, on February 2nd, the Canadian Prime Minister announced 25% retaliatory tariffs on $30 billion worth of American goods, including a wide range of products from orange juice and alcohol to household appliances and cosmetics. In early February, an agreement was reached between the two countries to temporarily postpone the implementation of trade tariffs to allow for further negotiations. As part of this compromise, Canada committed to appointing a special representative to combat fentanyl proliferation and to strengthen border security measures. Mexico, in turn, agreed to increase its military presence on its northern border. However, on February 10th, President Trump announced the imposition of 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from all countries, including Canada and Mexico, citing national security concerns. This sparked widespread concern in business circles and among political analysts. In early March, specifically on the 3rd, President Trump confirmed that the previously delayed tariffs would take effect the following day, stating that further negotiations were no longer possible. This announcement triggered a notable drop in U.S. stock markets, with the S&P 500 index falling by 1.8% and the Nasdaq 100 index by 2.6%. Investors reacted to the prospect of a trade war with anxiety, fearing negative consequences for the economy. On March 4th, the U.S. implemented 25% tariffs on Canadian goods, prompting an immediate response from Canada, which imposed retaliatory tariffs on $30 billion worth of goods from the U.S., demonstrating its determination to protect its economic interests. Nevertheless, on March 6th, the U.S. announced a 30-day postponement of tariffs on goods covered by the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. This postponement covered approximately 38% of Canadian imports and offered hope for a resumption of constructive dialogue between the parties. In response to the U.S. actions, Canada chose not to expand the scope of the tariffs already in place, maintaining existing measures. However, when the United States imposed a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum imports from Canada on March 12th, an immediate reaction followed. On March 13th, Canada announced the imposition of similar 25% tariffs on a wide range of American goods totaling $2.6 billion. Steel, aluminum, and many other products were affected, marking another escalation in the trade conflict. Additional retaliatory tariffs soon came into effect, further intensifying the trade relations between the two countries. But the trade war was not limited to the level of federal governments. Canadian provinces began to take independent measures to counter American tariffs. The province of Ontario ceased purchasing alcoholic beverages from American producers. Quebec went even further, removing American goods from the shelves of wine stores and initiating a comprehensive review of all government contracts involving U.S. companies. Other provinces followed suit, taking their own targeted measures in response to Washington's actions. In a show of provincial solidarity, Manitoba and Newfoundland and Labrador banned the sale of alcoholic beverages from the U.S. Nova Scotia took a different approach, increasing tolls on its highways, with the rate for American vehicles doubled. In Yukon, restrictions were placed on the sale of alcohol, and a thorough review of contracts with American companies was initiated to identify opportunities for further economic measures. British Columbia stands out, having imposed a selective ban on alcohol imports from U.S. states where Republicans are in power as part of a broader strategy of economic countermeasures. In early March 2025, British Columbia Premier David Eby announced plans to develop legislation that would allow the province to levy fees or duties on commercial vehicles from the U.S. traveling through British Columbia to Alaska. This proposal is part of a larger package of retaliatory measures against the trade actions of the United States. The Economic Stabilization Measures Response Act is under consideration in the British Columbia legislature, which could authorize the imposition of fees, although it would not automatically trigger this process, requiring further government decisions. The draft legislation mentions coastal ferry services, hinting at the province's desire for greater autonomy in levying fees on maritime transport, including ferries and cruise ships heading to Alaska. Premier Eby emphasized that the primary target of the new fee-collecting body would be American commercial trucks using British Columbia's roads to transit to Alaska. His statements did not mention private passenger vehicles, tourists, or personal trips, indicating a priority on freight transport. According to Eby, this move is a direct response to the threat of U.S. tariffs, allowing the province to charge commercial traffic that uses British Columbia's territory en route to Alaska. The legislative initiative, according to its initiator, is intended as a response to increasing trade pressure from the United States. Initially, the details of the project remained unclear, but it became known that it was conceived as a deterrent or as a means for negotiation. British Columbia Premier David Eby stressed that the introduction of fees may not happen immediately, but the province wants to have this option at its disposal as long as threats from the U.S. persist. The very possibility of introducing such fees has caused serious concern in Alaska, whose economy largely depends on transport routes through British Columbia. The introduction of fees on commercial trucks will inevitably lead to an increase in the cost of ground delivery. Alaskan importers and transport companies may face a significant increase in costs for each shipment through Canada, which is likely to affect end consumers. The executive director of the Alaska Trucking Association expressed concern that such measures could significantly increase transport costs, destabilize supply chains, and lead to higher prices for essential goods on which the population of Alaska depends. The introduction of new fees on freight transport through British Columbia could seriously affect prices in remote areas of Alaska, especially the cost of fresh produce and other essential goods. The fact is that a significant portion of these goods is delivered by road from the southern states. Alternative options such as sea transport cannot always provide the necessary speed and capacity, especially for perishable products. In fact, the new fee would be an additional burden on an already costly logistics chain linking Alaska to the rest of the country. If high tariffs are established, transport companies may be forced to revise their routes or reduce traffic volumes. Despite the availability of alternatives such as reorientation to sea transport, port infrastructure and the fleet may not be ready for a sharp increase in cargo traffic. Such changes could create additional strain on small businesses in Alaska, which critically depend on timely road deliveries. Alaska's fragile supply system is already under enormous pressure due to complex logistics, harsh weather conditions, and vast distances. The introduction of additional fees or administrative barriers at the border with British Columbia could disrupt this balance and create new areas of tension. Although the bulk of goods are still transported by sea and are not directly affected, the most time-sensitive and requiring special conditions goods such as fresh produce or equipment for emergency services may face serious difficulties. Delays in the supply of such products can cause a chain reaction of negative consequences for the economy and population of Alaska. If British Columbia's fee measures extend to other modes of transport, such as coastal ferries, the tourism industry may also feel the negative impact. One of the scenarios under discussion is the introduction of retaliatory measures against cruise ships heading to Alaska. British Columbia may consider introducing port fees or restrictions which would significantly complicate cruise routes, as almost all cruises to Alaska include stops in British Columbia ports. Any complications in the operation of cruise companies could lead to a reduction in the number of calls to Canadian ports or to changes in the regulatory framework of the United States, which, in turn, could reduce the attractiveness or accessibility of cruises to Alaska. Alaska's tourism industry, which receives about 2 million cruise passengers annually, is extremely sensitive to any fluctuations in tourist traffic or changes in routes. Even a slight decrease in visitors could significantly impact the region's economy, affecting the Canadian side of the border as well. Introducing tolls on highways, even if initially targeting commercial traffic, could indirectly affect automobile tourists. For example, delays at toll booths might deter RV owners traveling to Alaska. British Columbia authorities acknowledge that implementing such an initiative would require new infrastructure, including toll booths and staffing, which could be challenging. It's important to note that some sections of the Alaska Highway are subject to international agreements that historically prohibit tolls. This could create legal obstacles for British Columbia's plans. While British Columbia's proposal doesn't directly affect the Alaska Marine Highway system, introducing fees for coastal ferries could indirectly impact Alaska ferries using British Columbia ports or waters. The prospect of new provincial fees for the ferry terminal in Prince Rupert has raised serious concerns in Alaska. The Alaska Marine Highway System, already facing financial difficulties, might be forced to reduce service or raise fares, further isolating some communities. Premier Eby's proposal sparked immediate and sharp reactions in Alaska, demonstrating rare bipartisan unity in protecting the state's economic interests. Officials at all levels, business representatives and trade associations have expressed their opposition. In this challenging situation, the governor of Alaska has urged restraint and suggested focusing on resolving tariff disputes at the federal level. He expressed hope that the governments of Canada and the United States could settle their trade disputes before any provincial fees are implemented. Dunleavy cautioned against unilateral actions by provinces or states, emphasizing that they could negatively impact broader negotiations between the countries. Amid strained trade relations between the two countries, Alaska Governor Mike Dunleavy expressed hope for a diplomatic resolution to tariff disputes at the federal level. He urged provincial and state authorities to refrain from hasty unilateral actions that could exacerbate the situation and lead to undesirable consequences. His words reflected a desire for de-escalation, acknowledging Canadian concerns while cautioning that retaliation could set a dangerous precedent. Governor Dunleavy's statement was notably restrained, reflecting his desire to maintain friendly relations between Alaska and British Columbia despite the international disagreements. Senator Dan Sullivan took a different, more assertive stance. He stated his willingness to take countermeasures if British Columbia imposes fees on goods transiting to Alaska. In a radio interview, Senator Sullivan announced his intention to seek the repeal of a U.S. law requiring cruise ships traveling to Alaska to stop at Canadian ports. According to the senator, repealing this law would allow cruise liners to bypass Canadian ports as a response to British Columbia's unfriendly actions. This law was temporarily suspended in 2021 when Canada closed its ports due to the COVID-19 pandemic, allowing the United States to open a direct sea route for foreign cruise liners to Alaskan shores, bypassing Canadian ports. Senator Sullivan warned British Columbia authorities against actions that could harm Alaska's interests. He emphasized that in a conflict, Alaska is prepared to use a powerful tool, the cruise industry, which could significantly impact the tourism sector of British Columbia coastal cities like Vancouver and Victoria, whose economies heavily rely on the flow of tourists heading to Alaska. Essentially, Sullivan made it clear that any attempts by British Columbia to disrupt logistical chains connecting Alaska to the outside world would not go unanswered. In such a case, Alaska would call upon its political allies in the United States to retaliate against British Columbia's tourism business. This episode clearly demonstrates the close interconnectedness of the two economies and how political leaders can leverage this interdependence to achieve their goals, resorting to retaliatory measures in related areas. Brief pause for audience interaction. In Alaska's transportation industry, there is growing concern regarding the prospect of new fees. Jamie Benson, who heads the Alaska Trucking Association, stated that such measures would deal a significant blow to the state's economy. According to him, the introduction of tolls on British Columbia routes would lead to a significant increase in transportation costs, which would inevitably disrupt logistics chains and increase the cost of essential goods for Alaskans. Benson urged British Columbia politicians not to forget the long-standing good neighborly relations between the regions and to refrain from taking action until the federal governments resolve tariff issues. This appeal reflects the general opinion of the business community, which views the situation as a potentially dangerous escalation. Other Alaskan organizations representing business interests, such as chambers of commerce and industry groups, are also expressing concern that regional trade flows may be threatened. For decades, Alaskans and Canadians have maintained close trade ties, from the smooth operation of trucking companies crossing the border to joint tourism initiatives. Many observers note that a tariff war could cause mutual damage to these established relationships. Members of the Alaska State Legislature, especially those directly involved in the transportation industry, have expressed serious concern about this. Alaska State Senator Robert Myers, a truck driver by profession, warned of the catastrophic consequences of introducing duties. He emphasized that the supply of fresh produce to Alaska, a significant portion of which is transported by trucks, would be under threat. Myers also noted the potential negative impact on the logistics of the oil industry. His dual perspective as a legislator and truck driver gave special weight to his words. Other lawmakers in Juneau also stressed the importance of maintaining strong ties with Canadian neighbors. There were calls for the Alaskan administration to engage directly with British Columbia officials to find a mutually acceptable solution. In addition, legislators have asked the U.S. Trade Representative to consider Alaska's specific situation in any federal negotiations regarding trade relations with Canada. While public attention was focused on trucking, representatives of the Alaskan tourism industry also remained vigilant, closely monitoring developments. Major cruise lines, mostly based outside the state, have preferred to refrain from public comment on Sullivan's proposals. However, local tour operators and proponents of tourism development in Alaska have expressed concern about the potential long-term deterioration of relations. Some Alaskan tourism firms fear that an escalation of the conflict up to the exclusion of Canadian ports from cruise itineraries could create uncertainty and logistical difficulties despite the potential reduction in travel time. Supporters of the Alaska Marine Highway system, already facing reduced traffic volumes, expressed hope that connections with Prince Rupert and cross-border travel would not fall victim to a trade standoff. Overall, Alaskans who regularly use road and ferry routes have emphasized that seamless cross-border travel is an integral part of life in the North. They have called for restraint in taking measures that could negatively affect ordinary travelers. Transportation between the two countries has its key artery. The historic Alaska Highway, also known as the Alaskan, serves as the main land link between Alaska and the rest of the American states. Built during World War II, this road, approximately 2,450 kilometers or 1,523 miles long, originates in Dawson Creek in northeastern British Columbia and stretches through the Yukon to the interior of Alaska. Notably, about 80% of this highway lies within Canada. The Alaska Highway has become vital to economic activity in northeastern British Columbia, the Yukon, and northern Canada. It provides access to remote northern regions, serving as a major corridor for freight transport and travel between Alaska and the continental United States. There are other related highways that offer alternative routes. Among them is the Cassiar Highway, known as British Columbia Highway 37. It represents an alternative northern route through British Columbia and connecting to the Alaska Highway via the Yukon, providing drivers heading to Alaska with an additional pathway. The Haines Highway stretches from Haines, Alaska, to the heart of the Yukon, near the bustling Haines Junction. This route, which briefly touches the northwestern lands of British Columbia, serves as an important artery connecting the two regions. In turn, the Klondike Highway connects the picturesque Skagway, Alaska, with key points in the Yukon, such as Carcross and Whitehorse, opening the gateway from the Alaskan Panhandle to the vast inland road network. Not to be forgotten are the smaller cross-border roads, such as the route connecting Stewart in British Columbia with Hyder, Alaska. These modest routes also play a role, providing a link between southeastern Alaska and the Canadian road system. These highways are not just roads, they are the lifeblood of the economy and tourism. They facilitate trade, allowing for the seamless delivery of goods to and from Alaska. In addition, they open doors for thousands of travelers who journey between the lower 48 and Alaska each year. Often, these tourists prefer the comfort of RVs or travel in large caravans to enjoy the beauty of the northern lands. Statistics speak for themselves. In 2014, approximately 45% of the 3,665 summer visitors to the Yukon arrived via the Alaska Highway. This fact underscores its exceptional importance for tourist travel to the far reaches of the North. But the significance of this route is not limited to tourism. It is vital for Alaskan communities located along the road system, providing them with imports of food, building materials, and other essential goods. Without these roads, life in remote Alaskan settlements would be unimaginable. In addition to the extensive network of highways, Alaska is connected to the continental United States via marine corridors that run through the coastal waters and harbors of British Columbia. The Alaska Marine Highway system, known as AMHS, operates a fleet of ferries that serve as a marine highway connecting the settlements of southeastern Alaska with the states of Washington and British Columbia. This ferry system covers more than 3,500 miles of coastline, making it a vital transportation artery for the region. The southern terminus of AMHS is Bellingham, Washington. Historically, there was also a terminal in Prince Rupert, British Columbia, Canada's northernmost port with road access on the country's west coast. Many ferry routes heading to Alaska pass through the scenic Inside Passage, which stretches along the coast of British Columbia. AMHS plays a key role in providing transportation accessibility for Alaskans, offering the ability to transport vehicles and cargo. In addition, the system offers a unique type of tourist travel, allowing guests to enjoy the beauty of the coastal landscapes. In 2014, more than 100,000 travelers used the Alaska ferries to reach Bellingham or Prince Rupert, bringing with them thousands of cars and RVs. This route has become an important boost for the Alaskan tourism industry, offering an alternative to tiring car trips on long highways or flights. Alaska relies heavily on Canadian infrastructure to facilitate freight transport, tourist travel, and overall economic activity. The lack of a fully American land or rail route makes Canada a key transit hub for almost all ground transportation to the state. A significant portion of the goods heading to Alaska, including bulk materials and consumer goods, are shipped by sea from Washington state. However, ground transportation plays an indispensable role in the delivery of certain types of products. According to the Alaska Department of Transportation, more than 90% of all freight entering the state is transported by sea, highlighting the dominance of maritime transport in the region's economy. Nevertheless, the remaining 10% of freight includes goods that are critical and require prompt delivery. Fresh produce is one example. A significant portion of fruits and vegetables arrives in Alaska via the Alaska Highway through Canada, which helps maintain their freshness and quality. One Alaska state legislator who has experience as a truck driver emphasized that the bulk of fresh produce is delivered in this way. This is because perishable goods and urgent shipments are generally delivered faster by truck than by water. The oil and gas industry may also need expedited delivery of equipment and parts. As the same legislator noted, trucks are prioritized over barges for rapid cargo delivery. Thus, despite the heavy use of marine transport for moving large volumes of goods, Alaska relies heavily on Canadian highways for timely supply deliveries. Alaska's tourism industry is inextricably linked to the possibility of free transit through Canada. Each year, thousands of travelers, whether in their own RVs or as part of organized tour groups on buses, traverse the scenic highways of British Columbia and the Yukon to reach Alaska. In doing so, they spend money in Canadian towns along the way as well as directly in Alaskan tourist centers. Cruise ships and ferries also play a key role in Alaska's tourism industry, and here too there is a Canadian element. Under U.S. law, foreign cruise ships heading to Alaska from the continental United States are required to stop at a Canadian port. This requirement, enshrined in the U.S. Passenger Vessel Services Act, means that almost all major cruise routes to Alaska include visits to British Columbian ports such as Vancouver, Victoria, and Prince Rupert. This practice is mutually beneficial. Alaska attracts tourists, and Canadian ports receive economic benefits from these ship calls. In 2019, just before the start of the pandemic, Alaska welcomed approximately 1.3 million cruise passengers, and almost all of them arrived on routes through Canadian ports. In 2020, it was planned to increase this number to 1.9 million passengers, demonstrating the importance of cruise tourism to the region's economy. The Alaska Marine Highway system has historically connected the state to the Canadian city of Prince Rupert, British Columbia, serving as a crossroads for travelers on both sides of the border. This route is of great importance, providing Alaskans with access to the Canadian road and rail network. Alaska's tourism industry is closely integrated with the transportation infrastructure of its neighboring country, including highways, ports, and railway hubs. The introduction of tolls could lead to higher prices for goods supplied to Alaska, disrupt logistics chains, and create additional strain on the tourism sector. Representatives of the Alaskan government and business community are well aware of these potential consequences and unanimously oppose such measures. The strong reaction of the state's political leadership, from the governor's diplomatic efforts to the statements of U.S. senators, underscores the seriousness with which Alaska views any threat to its transportation routes. Canadian politicians, in turn, are forced to strike a balance between discontent with U.S. trade policy and the need to maintain constructive relations at the regional level. The recent conflict has highlighted how, even in a period of good neighborly relations between the U.S. and Canada, economic nationalism can have very tangible consequences at the local level. This episode underscores the need for strong international agreements and the resolution of disputes at the level of federal governments to prevent them from spilling over into interactions between individual states and provinces. In the current situation, both Alaska and British Columbia risk suffering losses if tensions persist. It is in their common interest to end tariff threats as soon as possible and reaffirm the long-standing partnership that has built not only roads and ferry routes, but also trust and shared economic prospects on both sides of the border. Viewer appreciation is the highest reward for content creators. As a token of gratitude for watching this video, we invite you to check out another interesting piece of content conveniently linked on the screen.